After Senate Republicans failed to pass bills that repeal or replace the Affordable Care Act, Congressman Earl Blumenauer thinks the political winds could be shifting. He thinks we could be turning onto a path towards universal health care.
Transformational change is possible far quicker than people recognize. There's something happening around the country.
Since Inauguration Day, Blumenauer has promised to resist Trump administration policies. He joins us tonight to discuss his efforts. From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. Members of the House and Senate are on their summer recess. They'll be back in D.C. in early September. Since President Trump's inauguration, Oregon Congressman Earl Blumenauer has waged a resist campaign, promising to fight the president's policies that don't reflect Oregon's values. Congressman Blumenauer is back in the 3rd District this week, kicking off a campaign he calls Beyond Resistance. He's here tonight to tell us what that's all about and what's happening with issues important to Oregonians like health care, transportation, the Farm Bill, marijuana, and more. Welcome to my guest tonight, Congressman Earl Blumenauer. Thank you for joining us here on Straight Talk. Always a pleasure to have you here,
Likewise,
Congressman.
Laurel. Look forward to it.
Well, it seems like every day on Capitol Hill we're hearing about a new tweet, a new development, a shakeup. How would you describe what the last weeks have been like in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I mean, you just described it. It is something. It's like a dumpster fire in the White House every day. I mean, we had the mooch for what, 10 days?
Scaramucci you're talking about, the communications director.
Watching various elements of the administration fighting amongst themselves. The president deciding unilaterally that he's going to wash transgender soldiers out of the military. And the military saying, well, no, wait a minute, you have to go through the chain of command. These things are indescribable. My head is still spinning, and I've been home for a whole week.
Let's talk a little bit about that shakeup. You mentioned Anthony Scaramucci. He was the communications director. Yeah. That prompted resignations by Sean Spicer and Ryan Priebus. And then 10 days on the job, he was fired, the mooch, as he's widely known. The announcement made just hours after Homeland Security Secretary General John Kelly was sworn in as the president's new chief of staff. What do you make of that big shakeup?
I don't know. I mean, I truly don't know. It remains to be seen whether the general can exert a little discipline on Donald Trump. It's going to be hard for somebody who's kind of been a reality TV actor in business and in his personal life for 71 years that he's going to turn on a dime. For the sake of the country, I hope there's a little more discipline that's engaged. And part of it is, frankly, we need to let the federal government operate. Even areas where I disagree with their policies, there's nobody home. There aren't people who are there who can deal with policy. We can't get answers for routine things. And it is demoralizing people who, the several million men and women who are actually delivering services, inspecting food, managing our wildlife, FBI, dealing with the whole range of things that people rely upon for our citizens, for veterans, making the military work. I hope it settles down, and I hope that we can kind of get past the drama, because we have a lot ahead of us this fall.
Well, while this is going on, the Dow hit a record high this week at more than 22,000. So the president tweeted, highest stock market ever, best economic numbers in years, unemployment lowest in 17 years, wages rising. In another tweet, he said the mainstream media seldom mentions that. The economy is booming and Oregon's economy is robust, so much so that Oregonians might get a kicker rebate. Yeah. Is the president getting enough credit for the good things?
Remember what he was saying. He didn't believe the Department of Labor statistics when he was running. He called them fake. He didn't believe them. He called this economic boom that began long before. I mean, we've had steady economic progress since the first 6 months of the Obama administration, and he was dismissing it as a bubble. I mean, you can't take what he says seriously. I mean, it's all depending on how it makes him look and feel. I am a little concerned, frankly, about the exuberance of the market. I don't think there's anything in terms of the fundamentals of the economy that would support stock prices that are actually this high.
And August typically can kind of be a bad month for the Dow, so May, the other shoe may drop.
But this has been going on, and if you look at price earnings ratios, they don't support these valuations. And I think most people feel we've had a pretty good run, but this probably is not the time to shift all your cash into betting that it's going to be going up, but being careful, I think.
You've been known as Mr. Resist since President Trump took office, fighting the administration policies that you don't feel represent Oregonians' values and best interests. But now you've started this email campaign for the next several weeks where you're putting out a new email every day called Beyond Resistance. What's that about, and why is that important to you?
Well, it's important that we not just fight back on things that are just abhorrent to most of the people I represent, like the ban on transgender soldiers. But there are things that we need to be doing in terms of health care, in terms of policies that range from what we're going to do with agriculture, transportation, smaller elements in terms of housing and affordability. So I've developed a series of things that I think are the steps that we need to take. Absolutely fight back about things that we disagree, but we need to have a positive agenda for things that are going to make a difference. And so every day this month we're going to be having specific recommendations, things that I care about, recommendations that I hope other people look at, and we might be able to do together.
You mentioned that ban, that tweet from the president with the blanket ban on transgender Americans serving in the armed forces quickly got criticism, even from staunch conservatives. You have an LGBTQ flag posted and hanging outside your office, and you're being sued by an activist, and some other members are as well, for having that flag. Here's a picture of the flag outside your office. Why do you have the flag there, and what do you think about this lawsuit? Well,
the agenda to be able to include everybody, I think, is important, and that's been something that I think we're proud of as a community. We're able to make sure that people, regardless of their gender orientation, that they can be safe, they can be productive, they can be welcomed. The flag is one little symbol. Today, I had a terrific town hall in Sandy, Oregon, and in the front row, after a few minutes, a person stood up who identified as a transgender soldier, who'd proudly served, was married to a transgender soldier, and shaken about whether or not she would be able to continue her service. I tried to make clear, and I feel very strongly, that anybody who's qualified and who wants to serve to protect the United States, we ought to honor that commitment. And for me in Capitol Hill to have a demonstration of that support, as well as speaking out, I think is important. We've got our work cut out for us as a community and as a nation, and we can't afford to leave anybody out who wants to contribute.
A lot of your Beyond Resistance policy statements are on health care, and it's been a dramatic few weeks on the Hill when it comes to health care, sort of must-see TV. I think more people than ever were watching C-SPAN during that vote in the Senate on the so-called skinny repeal and replace of Obamacare. How would you describe the drama surrounding that vote, and how much difference did Oregonians' calls and tweets make?
Well, I think what you saw in terms of the Senate dysfunction, confusion, and ultimately failure of a really bad proposal was a result of what people in Oregon and around the country decided that they were going to speak out. They were going to push back. They had their emails, their phone calls, they worked with others, they raised their voices, they developed momentum to be able to protect things that make a huge difference. The expansion of Medicaid, for instance, to millions of Americans has been absolutely vital. I had lunch today, or not today, earlier this week, with a woman here who has a severely disabled child. That Medicaid expansion made it possible, for example, for her to have respite care. I mean, this is a 24-hour-a-day real challenge, and without the Medicaid expansion and that coverage, she wouldn't be able to work and be productive and have the resources to give better care to her severely disabled son and be able to be productive. These things matter. I've been encouraged that people are paying attention. The Republicans actually have done something the Democrats have never been able to do, and that's get majority support for the Affordable Care Act, as people have focused on what it means and what is at risk. It has been encouraging that people are involved. It's encouraging that people are paying attention. I think people now know more about Medicaid than ever in its history. And that's important because these things affect our lives. 3
Republican senators have joined the Democrats in the Senate to vote against that skinny repeal. John McCain of Arizona, Susan Collins of Maine, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. And you have a tweet that you put out, a picture of you with Senator John McCain, and you said, "Thank you, Senator John McCain, for the courage to do your job right and demand other people do the same thing." Did you ever have any doubts about the way Senator McCain might vote?
Well, you don't know. It was, I mean, first of all, he returned to Washington, D.C. after having surgery on his brain, which is a little unnerving. People who have things cutting into their body have been advised not to fly, and he was back in less than a week. He is unpredictable, but at core, he really does have some very strong values, and he's not somebody who's going to be bullied. And frankly, he doesn't owe anything to the president who said he didn't like losers and called John McCain a war hero who refused to be released from prison until all his soldiers, all his airmen were released. I mean, that he wasn't a hero because he was captured. McCain remembers that. He's an intensely proud man. He also feels strongly about being able to make the process work right.
And let's listen, because we do have some sound from what he said on the Senate floor, calling out Democrats and Republicans for not working harder together to have some progress. Let's listen to what he had to say.
What have we to lose by trying to work together to find those solutions? We're not getting done much apart. I don't think any of us feels very proud of our incapacity. Merely preventing your political opponents from doing what they want isn't the most inspiring work. There's greater satisfaction in respecting our differences, but not letting them prevent agreements that don't require abandonment of core principles, agreements made in good faith that help improve lives and protect the American people. The Senate is capable of that. We know that. We've seen it before. I've seen it happen many times, and the times when I was involved, even in a modest way, with working on a bipartisan response to a national problem or threat, are the proudest moments of my career and by far the most satisfying.
It was a powerful speech, and there's some buzz this week that we're seeing some rare bipartisanship on health care from both the House and the Senate. One plan being proposed by the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House, 43 Democrats and Republicans, including Oregon Congressman Kurt Schrader. Their plan aims to reduce insurance premiums by shoring up struggling health insurance exchanges. Then in the Senate, we have Washington Senator, Democrat Patty Murray, along with Republican Lamar Alexander, talking about holding hearings when they get back in September on a health care plan. Are you encouraged by this? Can you get behind any of these plans?
Well, these are all encouraging steps. The fact that the things could not move in the Senate if people knew what they were voting on, I mean, that was astounding. The only way they could get the votes is if they kept secret what it was. And then votes that the senator sort of torpedoed were as a condition that the Republicans that did vote for it voted on the understanding that it wouldn't be enacted. So in that backdrop, when we have people on both sides that are trying to take some incremental steps, I find that encouraging. They're steps in the right direction. We need to do a lot more in terms of bringing costs down and extending coverage.
And what you'd like to see ultimately is a single payer system, and you've introduced a bill to move the nation in that direction, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All Act, and you spoke at a public forum about that here in Portland in May. So we want to play part of what you said about that and why you're optimistic that maybe it's not that far off. Let's listen.
I think transformational change is possible far quicker than people recognize. There's something happening around the country. 20 years from now, there will be a single-payer system of some variation. I think it could be 10 years. Things might happen sooner, depending on what we all do.
And Congressman, every time that this subject of single payer comes up on the show, I get tweets and emails from people who are very much against the system, saying it moves towards socialism. They say it takes away choice, innovation, disincentivizes research, puts the government too much in control. It would be very expensive, mean higher taxes. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Well, we're the only developed country that doesn't have single payer. And a lot of Americans do have single payer. Medicare is a single payer program. Medicaid is a single payer program. And people have choices from doctors. There are variations where you mix and match private insurance. So it's absolutely not the case that it has to be at the expense of our being able to have choices. In Canada, people get sick less often, they get well faster, they live longer, and it costs a fraction of what we spend here. And yes, they have choices. You would be able to have your own insurance if you wanted to add to it. I think what has happened is people recognize that the system we have now is not a system. There are too many pieces, it's too expensive, it's too confusion, there's too many gaps. I think what the Republicans have done with this assault on the system, that it accelerates probably by 10 years where we're going to be with single payer. It might be Medicare for more, it might be Medicaid for all. There are variations, but I think we're moving in that direction to simplify, expand, and lower costs.
You've been talking to a lot of Oregonians, especially East Portlanders, people in East Multnomah County about transportation, but we're going to talk about that after the break. We'll continue our conversation with Congressman Earl Blumenauer in 2 minutes.